conversation number 17. We will get started, but the coffee job of the day is Folgers Hazelnut. I'm a coffee drinker, so hence coffee and conversation. But looking forward to tonight's conversation. Don't have any guests because this is a definitely a topic that I just want to talk about. And then, if you want to chime in, please do chime in. Please like and share. I appreciate it. Definitely like and share. So, conversation 17, and it is talking about grief. So, I, I I'll go back to when I was starting Coffee and Conversation, and it was last year. And my first show, I talked about, and I went through, and last season was about mental health and just different things dealing with your mental health. And so the first show, I talked about the stuff that I went through in my life. I talked about how, my mom passed and my dad passed within a 3 year range of each other. So it was definitely a hard time. So we're gonna get into this conversation again. If you're joining, if you're watching, and you have something that you want to share, definitely share it. I was, all last week trying to figure out, hey, what am I going to talk about this week? Because I'm doing things different in season two. So I was like, okay, God, just show me. And all last week, it kept being on grief, 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 grief. So, um, disclaimer: I am not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist, but I understand grief because I had to grieve myself. Um, and everybody's different, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about how grief is something that everyone deals with in their own way, in a different way, but it's how you make it through. It's how you get on the opposite side of your grief. Is how you um, still remember the good times, but still are able to, grieve at those times that you need to grieve. But one of the things that I will say, and I'll probably say it throughout this conversation, is grieving has no timetable. We grieve whenever. It might be a trigger, it might be something that comes along, but we grieve, and we can't help that. And so as we go on, I did a lot of just trying to figure out what to say about this subject because there's so much to unpack, so much to say. So let's get started. So grief. Let me give you the definition of grief. So grief is a natural response to a loss. All right. It's the emotional suffering from when you feel something when someone you love, or something or someone you love is taken away from you. So that is what grief is. It's a natural response to loss. So I just wanted to just give that background. So just in case someone didn't know, they would know. So what are some things that people grieve from? And again, if something that I talk about reaches to you, or something that I say reaches out to you, definitely um, you know comment, or hopefully what I say can help. But when I look at some of the things that you can grieve from: divorce, relationship breakup, loss of health, losing a job, loss of financial stability, a miscarriage, retirement, death of a pet, loss of a cherished dream, a loved one's serious illness, loss of a friendship, loss of safety after trauma, selling your family home. So, if any of those resonate with you, again, these are all these are all different things that people grieve from. So when we talk about that, there's so much again that we can unpack and so many things to talk about. The biggest thing that I want to talk about is, the seven stages, the seven stages of grief. So you have shock and denial. So I'm gonna kind of go through these and kind of break them down as much as possible. But I want to really I wanted to talk about this subject because um, people grieve, and I think sometimes when we grieve, we feel like we can't grieve too long because this or that, or we life continues on, and we get that. But you know everyone takes loss differently, and that's something that we all have to understand and respect. So when we talk about the seven stages of grief, you got shock and denial. When you talk about shock and denial, you know, um, I'll give you an example. I think when my mom, um, when I got the news from my brother back in 2015 that my mom had passed, I was in denial because I was shocked, and then I was in denial because I couldn't believe what my brother had just told me. And it was something that was hard to hear, because I was at my my first job when I moved here to Dallas. I was at my first job, so understanding that I was in shock was a big thing. I remember I couldn't drive that day. My auntie had to drive my vehicle to their house, just because I had to. I was just in shock. So that first stage is shock and denial. The second stage, pain and guilt. I'm gonna say this. So, and it's interesting. I was talking to somebody last week about this same thing. When it comes to grief and when it comes to just this actually one thing, which is pain and guilt. So when you talk about pain and guilt, you're talking about um, remorse. Hey, I'm remorseful for this, and you start looking at things and you start saying to yourself, "Man, I feel guilty for not calling that person, or I feel guilty for not going to see that person." So I think about, I remember my mom saying, "Hey, are you coming home, or are you going straight coming straight here to Dallas?" And so I remember that like it was yesterday, but I remember it because I felt guilty, um, of of knowing that I should have went home, but understanding that my mom told me, "Hey, go and get yourself set up," and so that's what I did. But again, I think after when she passed, it was definitely a remorse there, and I kept thinking to myself, man, I should have went home. I should have went home. So I don't know who feels like that, but that's again that is the second stage of the seven stages of grief. So you got the third, you got anger and bargaining. So your anger, you're like, why did this happen? Who is to blame? Bargaining, make this not happen. In return, I'll do this. You know, I'll think about, people say, God, if you just get me out of this, if you just get me out of this one situation, I won't do X, Y, and Z. So I definitely want people to understand that at the end of the day, that it's a lot that comes with it. It's a lot that comes with just understanding that. So the next thing, so um, you got shock, denial, stage one, stage two, pain and guilt, stage three, anger, bargaining, stage four, depression. So when I went through what I went through, I was in a stage of depression for a long time. and I didn't realize that I was depressed. And so when I figured out that I was depressed, and I figured out that that was what was going on with me, I realized that, hey, I gotta do something about this. I gotta get myself um, out of this. But I didn't know how. I didn't know what I needed to do. So I figured, there were so many things that were going on, and again, you go through the different stages, and the stage that I was going through when it came to depression was, um, I didn't know at the time that I was depressed, but I was going through, just not wanting to do anything, feeling a certain way. Um, I'm too sad to do anything, and I didn't realize it. I just felt a certain way, and so when I continued to really push myself to try to understand why I was feeling the way I was feeling, it was a lot going on, a lot of emotions, a lot of I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that. Um, you know, I realized that I was depressed, and depression is serious. I come to realize this. I talked about it last season, and for mental health, that depression is something that's serious, something that we all, might go through in our lifetime, but at the same time, we can get out of it. And so I say to you, when you're going through something like that, that you understand that depression is real, but you can get out of depression. You have therapists, you have different ways to combat that, and then we'll definitely talk about that, because that leads also into being able to deal with grief. So, all right. So number five, you got upward turn. Upward turn is okay. Now I understand that I'm depressed. So now, how do I turn this around to start looking up and start getting back to life? It's not easy. Um, I'll tell you firsthand, it's not easy. I remember when I got the news about my mom, I was in a place of darkness. I would go home. I would go to work, come home, sit in the dark. I did that for like 6 months. That's all I did. I didn't go out. I didn't do nothing, because I realized that I just didn't want to do anything. It wasn't until I remember my brother popped up on me, and drove from Arkansas here to check on me the next year in 2016. He came to check on me, and that began to help me heal, because I saw my brother, and I knew that he was just checking on me. He was trying to help me get to a point and just make sure that I was okay. So it was a upward turn for me, going from being depressed to turning around to understanding that I needed to make a turn and start getting back to life. Not forgetting, not saying that I still wasn't grieving, but understanding that life still has to go on. I can't continue this trend of, going home, going to work, going home, going to work, going home, sitting in the dark and not doing nothing with my life. And then from upward turn, then you have reconstruction. And so reconstruction, you talk about um, being able to walk through, and reconstruct everything when it comes to your life, when it comes to just everything that you had basically given up on, everything that you're saying to yourself, man, I'm done with this. I'm done with everything. I don't want to do this, but it's putting the pieces back together, understanding and saying, hey, this happened. I'm grieving because of this. But how can I reconstruct what I what was once destructed, how can I reconstruct it to understand that I have to get on with life? I have to move past what was going on. It's not an easy thing. I want to say that it's not a, tomorrow another light switch turns on and I can automatically go to reconstruction, which is the sixth stage of grief. You can't just go from stage one automatically to stage six. It's a process, and I understood that, and so I had to tell myself that it's going to take a while to reconstruct what I used to do. Some things will be different because, if I was doing this with this person and this person passed or left my life, then I got used to that. So how can you reconstruct something that you used to do with somebody? But you have to, figure it out and sit down and say, how can I move on? How can I honor them? I remember one of my friends, he was actually on the show last year, last season, Kevin Jackson. He said, "Man, find things to um, do in remembrance of your mother. Find things that will help you with that grieving process." And I think that's a part of reconstruction. It's a part of understanding that you have to reconstruct, your life, and you have to start taking pieces of the puzzle that were taken away and being able to put them back together. The puzzle won't all be put back together the same way, but at least you're taking the pieces of the puzzle that were taken away, and you're trying to put them back. Are you going to be able to put all of them back at the same time? You're not, but you're starting to do that and reconstruct what you're trying to do. And then the last one is acceptance. Um, Being able to accept the fact that this happened in your life. Is it an easy thing? Is it the easiest thing? No. Um it's not. It took me a while. Again, I went through, I want to say, and we're talking about seven, completion, for those who, spiritual, um a number of completion. And I think about, seven because it took me 7 years really, to get myself to a good point in my life to where I was able to accept what had happened, to understand that, you know, hey, we're all going to pass away, but it was just, my mom passed away and then my dad passed away 3 years later. So it was hard. So, but I had to accept that. I didn't want to accept it, but I think to move past and be able to go through the grieving process, you have to be able to accept it. Again, there's no timetable for any of this. I'm gonna keep saying that, because certain people, will tell you, "Hey, you need to move on." That's not realistic. You can move on, but you're always going to remember what's going on with the person. You're always going to remember, what happened, the memories. So those are the seven stages of grief. I just wanted to talk about that. Now, when we talk about grief, grief can be a roller coaster. It can be so. One of the things, excuse me, one of the things that I learned when I went through, these 7 years of just, it was up and down. It was, my mom passed, and I was down for a while, and then, like I said, my brother came, and then I was back up. And then my auntie, my great aunt, who had raised my mom and all of that, she passed the very next year, and so I was back down. And so, 2007. So I was good 2017. Towards the end of 2017, my dad tells me, "Hey, I got stage 4 cancer." So again, roller coaster back down. So again, grief is like a roller coaster because you never know, how you're gonna feel. And one of the other things that I'll mention right here is talking about triggers. When you see something, when you hear something, when you smell something, when you see something on TV, you're going to say to yourself, "Man, like, okay, I um, I remember this person because of the way they smell. I remember this person because of the way they used to do X, Y, and Z. I remember this. I remember that." So one of the things that I'll tell you that triggers is something that I've learned that can happen at any given moment. So again, when you go through the grieving process, you have to understand how do you deal with the triggers. So I go back to I'll talk about. So I went through a grief class in my church. It's called K's Ways, and that class helped me out so much. Um, and it was something that helped me understand grief a lot more when it came to understanding that it's okay to cry. It's okay that you're not going to wake up tomorrow and everything be okay. One of the things that I always remember from that class is it takes one to I think 3 or 5 years to just get over one person grieving the grieving of one person. So I had 3 people pass within 3 years. So that, took a toll on me. But I thank God for, people that came into my life. And one of the things that I would say to you, when talking about roller coaster and understanding that when you go through this roller coaster, it's important to have people in your life. It's important to have people that can come to you and say, "Man, like, I'm here for you." To understand that you never know who God puts in your path, to know that you have someone that might have went through the same thing that you went through. So, when we talk about this and we talk about grief, is understanding that, hey, I am not I am not in this alone. I am not going through this alone. I have somebody or some people that have been through what I've been through. Let me talk to them. So when we talk about that, it's one of those things of understanding that, hey, I know that I have someone that I can talk to, that I can go to when I'm going through something. So I just wanted to just talk about that because when it comes to really dealing with grief and understanding that, you know, a roller coaster of grief is something that you can feel these mixed emotions and you're not understanding why, but that's a part of it. So when I went through Caseways, I it was a 6 week course, and I really started to understand a lot of the stuff that I went through, the words that are used, the feelings that you feel. Um, it really helped me put things in perspective. Y'all don't remember my show from last week? I talked about perspective. So it made me understand things in a very different way when it came to grief. And so, again, I wanted to really um, hopefully help someone, even if it's just one person, but to understand that grief is something that we all will deal with at some point of our life. Whether again, a loss of a job, loss of a loved one, retirement, anything, a loss of a pet. Those things can um, cause us to be in those moments of grief, depression, and all of that. So, just wanted to talk about that. So, I'll talk about this next important thing when it comes to grief is seeking support. Um, so I remember when this whole grieving process started with me. Um, I'm a very observant person, and when I'm looking at who, I'm like, I don't want to deal with talking to a mental health tech. I'm sorry, a psychologist or psychiatrist. I felt like, you have to relive your story every time you tell somebody, and sometimes it's hard for somebody because you're retelling your story every single day. Like you're retelling and saying the same. Like you're having to tell a person, and then if that doesn't work out, then you have to tell another person. So, um, yeah, it was hard for me to look at and say, "Hey, I want to um, get a mental health professional, psychologist, psychiatrist, all of that." But I had to understand this. Um, Even when I sought, counsel from my pastor and other ministers and pastors within my church, one of the things that one of my pastors said at the church that I go to now, one of the pastors there, he said, "Hey, it's okay for you to go and see somebody that's in that field, that's professionally in that field, that can help you. I can give you the spiritual guidance, I can help you spiritually, but you have people that gets paid for that." So I want to say that because I think a lot of people, especially men, and I talked about this last season, is that we don't want to talk about what's going on with us. We would rather keep it balled up. We would rather not want anybody to know what's going on with us. But one of the things as I started really getting into and understanding grief is that when you keep things balled up and you understand that these things that you have going on are things that can hinder you, can push you back, um, that can make you feel a certain way because you are not able to open up. You don't want to talk to anybody. And that's understandable because I was the same way. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want anyone to know what was going on with me. I didn't want anyone to know that I was grieving. I didn't want anyone to know that I was depressed. But I understood that at the end of the day that I needed to talk to someone. And so when the pastor said that, I was like, okay, maybe I need to go and talk to someone. But again, I know how I am. So I went and talked to somebody, and it was probably one of the hardest things because I had to relive some of the things that I had went through. So when I finally did, go through, and I finally did see someone, it was like, oh man, here we go again, talking to somebody, and I didn't feel comfortable. So I left that person, went to another person, didn't feel comfortable. So I'm just giving you, tidbits on, what I went through that somebody else might go through, and just the understanding that all of this is a process. So just understanding that when it comes to grief, it's going to be a process. But I think, when you seek a professional, when you seek a social worker, when you seek a psychologist, a psychiatrist, these are the people that get paid in that profession to be able to help, to be able to give you coping skills, to be able to tell you things that you possibly don't think about, things that you possibly will look at and say, hey, this might work for you. Have you tried this? Meditation, like there's so many different things that they can, give you and recommend for you. But it's all on taking that first step. And I think that's the hardest thing for a lot of people. How do I take this first step? One, to open up. Two, to be able to talk to somebody about what I'm going through without getting emotional. Three, to be able to really tell a person and say, hey, at the end of the day, I'm going through something, but I need to talk to somebody because I'm going through and I'm hurting. So we just have to understand that it's nothing wrong when it comes to seeking support for grief and loss. There's nothing wrong with that. So when we talk about that, I talked about it a little while ago. Um, another way is drawing comfort from your faith, being able to get closer to God, to be able who are whoever, but to be able to understand that, I have to do something to get myself back. And again, that's that part of reconstruction. That's that part of saying, hey man, I need to get myself back. I'm telling you everything that I had to do myself. Again, people work different, and grief is different for everyone. But I'm just giving you, examples and nuggets on how, this all plays in part, and examples that I can use as far as what I went through in my grieving process. So, it's part of the reconstruction of putting the pieces back together, and being able to say, God, I need you to put the pieces back together for me. I need you to be able to come in and say that hey, I see a problem. How can I come in and piece by piece put it back together for you? Piece by piece, put it back together for you, your emotions, your friendships. How can I reconstruct the things that you lost? How can I come in and reconstruct the pain and suffering that you had to deal with? How can I come in and reconstruct just your overall daily things that you used to do and now you don't do anymore? So, you know, drawing from your faith is a big one for me. I had to really pull myself, and I remember when my dad passed, I was at church, and I remember going to tell my youth pastor at the time. I said, "Hey, I just got the news that my dad passed." And again, at that time, me and my dad weren't, so we had mended our relationship and all of that, and so we were, the understanding was, hey, this is my dad, and I was trying to mend our relationship. But again, he passed before we really got to do that. But the understanding was, hey, my dad passed. I got a lot of emotions, but I was still at church. And so we were at that point. This was before COVID. I said to myself, like, man, I'm not leaving church. Um, I got a lot going on. I got a lot of emotions going on, but I can't leave church because I was back there and it was me teaching to our youth at my church. And so I had to, again, remember to myself, like, man, like, I'm in pain, but I feel like that was a point of being able to heal myself, reconstruction. So went through all of that, and I remember after church, my pastor and her husband, our bishop, they prayed for me and some other pastors, and I just remember just feeling that warmth of, man, I got a church family, who cares, that will stay after church and pray with you, that will stay and be there with you through the good times and the bad times. And so, this was definitely hard for me when I was going through that, but just the understanding of having, someone and having a church family that will pray for you. So yeah, so that was that. And then the other thing, so when you talk about, the next thing is join a support group. So I would say this: when it comes to a support group, um, I look at support groups differently. And the reason why I say that is because I joined the military fraternity, and that like I always tell our founders, this frat saved my life when I was about to be like I felt well, I was at rock bottom. And this was like literally after my dad passed in the end of 2018, December 30th, 2018, he passed. And I remember like 2019 beginning, I was going through some mental health issues, and I was like, man, like I was going way down. And then I remember towards the end of the year in 2019, I got told about um, my military frat, and I was like, okay, I'll check it out. I did the research, and next month it'll be 4 years. And I always look back, and I always say to myself, if it wasn't for this frat, I don't know where I would be, because it came at the right time, and it was a support group of brothers that had been in the military. Some had lost their moms, so the understanding of being able to talk to other brothers that have went through similar things that you have went through. So it was definitely something that um, I was glad, and I always say God makes no mistakes. And so the people that he puts in your path are the people that he puts in your path. So he put those people in my path, and I was so happy um, to see that this was what I needed in my life. This was the thing that was missing. When they talk about support groups and they talk about getting involved to help boost yourself, I felt like this was part of my reconstruction. I was still in that time. I was still in a reconstruction phase of this grieving process with my mom. Again, I was in the reconstruction with my mom. I ain't even was in the reconstruction with my dad because, again, he had just passed the year before. So, um, I say that to just encourage people who might listen to this today, and in the future, that whatever organization, whatever group you join, do it because it can better you. Do it because it can help you grow. Do it because it's something about that organization that you see that's important to you. That's important to your morals and values. That's important to the things that you're trying to do in your life. And I felt like, um, the frat that I'm in really helped me get to a point in my life, and to this day, still helping me. And so I will forever be grateful for that because it was a support group that really helped me move past the things that I was going through at that time, to keep my mind off of things. Was it easy? No, I still was grieving. I still was going through stuff. Again, I was at the reconstruction phase um, when my mom had passed, but I still was able to again continue to live life, and I was just putting the pieces back together one by one. So it was definitely a long road. It was definitely hard, but I understood that it was going to take that. It was going to take hard times. It was going to take people coming in my life and me having to relive certain things, to talk about certain things, to open up about certain things. One of the things I would say right here is we have to be able to talk to someone. I encourage anybody that listens to this, talk to someone. We get in this mode of I don't want to talk, but you have to talk to someone, because if you don't talk to someone, you keep all that bottled up, and it does nothing for your health. It does nothing for the people that are around you if you have a family, because you can lash out on people based upon the fact that you are grieving. And sometimes we grieve differently. And one of the ways that there's some people that I know and I've heard in the past, they grieve by lashing out and taking it out on others that had nothing to do with it, but that's their way to grieve. And so sometimes I feel like we just need to talk it out, and talk about what's going on instead of always holding things in, because that, again, that does nothing for us. That does nothing for our mental health. That does nothing for our family. That does nothing to help us get past this grief that we are facing. We're going to deal with grief, but it's how you deal with it that will help you get through it. It's how you deal with it that will help you get through it. And so when I talk about and I think about reconstruction, you're reconstructing, like a person that is reconstructing their body, or a person that's reconstructing something. But I always look at it from a puzzle standpoint, that you're taking the pieces of a puzzle and you're taking piece by piece and you're putting it back together. So you disassembled this puzzle, and now you're trying to figure out how where does this piece go? Where does this piece go? So you're reconstructing your life. But in part of reconstructing, you have to be able to go and talk to someone. You have to be able to understand that this is a process. You have to to understand that there's going to be emotions involved, that along the way, everyone that was cool with you might not be cool with you, but you have to be okay with that, because you can't, your grief is different from another person's grief. And so you can't, I can't get mad at the next person, if our chapter stops, at chapter 4. I can't get mad because, again, I helped this person up to this point. Now it's up now for me, because this person stopped at chapter 4. I feel like, okay, so God is going to send somebody to come into chapter 5 or whatever, and stay for however many chapters. So I just have to believe that and understand that and know that that can happen. So again, going back to support, you get support from people, again, organizations, church, family members, anybody that you feel like, oh, I need to do this. Some people, I know, pick up sports. Some people pick up a routine, like, oh, I'm gonna start dancing. I'm gonna start picking up boat. Like, I remember a brother, reading, a brother that goes to our church, and I know he lost his father, and he said that he picked up golf as therapy for him. And I tell you, I mean, for me, it was me picking up, doing something different, whether that was, bowling, whether that was doing something just different from what I used to do, because you just never know. There's so many different things that can happen, that can help you when it comes to the grief process, which is, therapy. I remember when I was, before my mom had passed, one of the things that I was going through with my own mental health and what the doctors helped me with is doing music therapy. I did music therapy. I learned how to play the keys, and I learned how to, play a song, and I practiced that song over and over and over, and it was repetition, but it was therapy for me. It was soothing. It was peace for me. So find something, if you're going through something, find something, playing golf, going to play ball, playing a video game, something to ease your mind off of what's going on. I'm not saying to take yourself out of the world, but take your mind and those distractions. One of the other things that I remember from K's Ways, when we talk about support and all of this, is, you know, when you're going through something and understanding that, hey, I hit this moment. Okay, I'm going through this moment, and you say to yourself, now I'm crying. Something triggered it. I watch TV, um, and for me, I think about it's certain people that remind me of my mom, and so I just be like, man, I can't watch this, or if I watch it, I automatically it's a trigger for me, and I know that, and so I was like, okay, I'm in this moment, but I can't stay in this moment that long, so I had to either change what I'm watching. I have to figure out and think about a memory that is a good memory that I had from my mom to take my mind off of that bad, thinking about that and try to focus on something positive. All right. Um, so we talk about support groups. We talk about all of that. Uh, so I'll talk about how grieving is highly an individual experience. There's no right or wrong way to grieve. I'll say that again. There's no wrong or right way to grieve. I think that when we talk about grieving, a lot of people um, feel a certain way when it comes to grieving. People might look at it as, hey, I'm grieving, and I'm not crying, and you say to yourself, well, I mean, do they care? But the thing is, sometimes everyone grieves different, and so they might not be crying, but they might be going through something else, and they might grieve a different way. So we have to understand that moment when it comes to that. The other thing I'll say, there is no normal timetable for grieving. I said that before, that there is no timetable when it comes to grieving. We all grieve, but we grieve differently. And we have to understand that because we grieve differently, that we can't rush our grieving compared to somebody else grieving. So there is no timetable when it comes to grieving. And I had to learn that. I had to learn that more than anything else. I had to learn that there is no timetable for that. All right. So I wanted to do this. I wanted to do myth and fact. If you don't cry, myth, if you don't cry, it means you aren't sorry about the loss. Fact, crying is a normal response to sadness, but it's not the only one. Those who don't cry may feel the pain, like I was saying, may feel the pain just as deeply as others. They may simply have other ways of showing it. All right. Another myth, grieving should last about a year. Fact, there is no specific time frame for grieving. How long it takes others from per, I'm sorry, how long it takes differs from one person to the other. All right. Myth, moving on with your life means forgetting about your loss. No. Fact, moving on means you've accepted your loss, but that's not the same as forgetting. You can move on with your life and keep the memory of someone or something you lost as an important part of you. All right. Um, Again, how to deal um, with the grieving process, acknowledge your pain, accept that grief can trigger many different and unexpected emotions. Understand that your grieving process will be unique to you. Seek out face to face support from people who care about you. Support yourself emotionally by taking care of yourself physically. All right. So, um, again, I wanted to just touch on the subject. I know this is probably not a subject that a lot of people like talking about, but I wanted to talk about it again. It was on my heart to talk about, so I wanted to, go ahead and talk about it this week. But I definitely thank you all for listening. Thank you all for continuing to support Coffee and Conversation with me, Kevin Smith. Look forward to the next couple of conversations. I'm gonna do something different. You'll see next week. But we do got Black History Month, so I want to do some conversations with some people when it comes to that. So I thank you all for vibing with me and listening. So as always, no matter if it's early morning, late afternoon, or late at night, a cup of Joe and a conversation will always get you right. This has been Kevin Smith. Have a good night.